Hi, and welcome to Inside View. I'm your host, Joel Metzger, and joining me today is Commander Dewayne Lewis of the San Andreas Area CHP. Dewayne, welcome.
Thank you.
This is the second time I've had you on in a fairly short succession, actually. Thanks for joining us again.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
You betcha. So last time, for those who missed it, we learned a lot about you and your history and how you got up here, and we're going to do kind of an abridged version of that for anyone who missed the last interview. But after we get done with that, we're going to talk a lot about distracted driving and the dangers of that, as well as some other CHP-related things, including education and how much the CHP does for the community, for teens, for seniors, sober grad night, all that kind of stuff, and the involvement there. But to start, do tell us a little bit about how you progressed through the CHP and ended up in Calaveras County.
Well, I've been on the Highway Patrol for 27 years. Obviously, you start out as an officer, and after a couple of years, you have the option of looking at the promotional process. I actually worked the road for 15 years before I promoted to sergeant, and I was a sergeant for about 6.5 years and then became a lieutenant. And I've been a lieutenant now for 6 years. I came up here to San Andreas a year ago, January 1st, took over the command from the former commander, Josh Ellers, and I've just been having a great time up here over the last year.
So do you commute up from, where do you live? What's your...
I live in Sacramento. I drive up every day. And
I mean, I just made that drive today. It's actually kind of a nice drive, isn't it?
You know, it's relaxing as I drive up here. It kind of takes the stress away as you drive up into the mountains. So it's a nice drive.
I've always wondered this about a CHP officer. You said you were on the road for 15 years, and now you're doing some commuting. Being on the road that much, what is that like? I mean, do you ever just get sick and tired of driving?
You know, that's our life, really. I know before I came on the Highway Patrol to drive, I don't know, 30 or 40 miles seemed like a long way, and now that's nothing really, because that's what we do all day really for a living. So I like driving, so it's not a problem.
So yeah, you just type of personality. If you don't like it, you're probably in the wrong business.
Right.
So you came up a little more than a year ago, took over the command of the CHP in San Andreas. Now, that's the only office in San Andreas, the main office, but there's kind of a branch office up on Highway 4?
Yeah, we have our Ebbets Pass resident post. 2 officers are typically assigned up there. And that's just because, especially in the wintertime up by Bear Valley with the snow, for our guys to respond from here, it's such a long response time. And we identified that many years ago, long before me, that those response times to help people needed to be a little bit quicker. So they established the resident post up there, and our guys work up there. They work from up there. And they come down to the office every so often, turn in papers, reports, and come down for training days and that sort of thing. But they're pretty much up there serving the communities up there in Arnold and up towards Bear Valley.
So really nice to have that. You know, I imagine some counties just have that one base, and some of those farther out areas will just have to deal with maybe a slower response time. And isn't that one of the challenges for you in this county, is just how big it is?
It is. Calaveras County is huge, comparatively so to some of the other counties in the state. And, you know, we try to put as many people as we can out on the road, given our allocated strengths. And right now we're a little bit down on numbers, but we're getting a couple new ones coming in March and in May. So hopefully that'll help out, get us to be able to deploy our resources a little bit more efficiently.
So throughout the county, what you have, like, how many people are kind of on patrol at any one given day?
Well, it's kind of tough to say. I mean, typically we have at least 2 or 3 on our day shift, depending on that, and that encompasses their days off, training requirements they have to attend, like down in Sacramento at our headquarters, vacation times, that sort of thing. So, but typically I'll have 2 or 3 out on day shift. I have an overlap shift that comes in at 10 o'clock, and there's a couple officers assigned to that. They tend to cover the days and graveyard shift when guys are at training or out sick. And then I have a couple units out on graveyard shift.
How many total staff are under your command?
Right now, I'm allocated 20 strength. I'm down a couple from there, but
And is that patrol officers, or is that the whole staff of the whole?
That's the uniformed strength that I'm allocated for San Andreas. I do have 3 uniformed officers that are working in the office, reviewing accident reports, arrest reports, dealing with our evidence, our people that come in that want a VIN verification, school bus testing, all the things that the Highway Patrol does, obviously, that officers have to do. And I also need to have an officer as a watch officer at the front counter every day for the purpose of signing off people's fix-it tickets. So.
And then the media are always asking for things.
Yeah, and then the media is always calling in. So that's what my office people do. They handle the media folks. So.
CHP doesn't just write tickets. I don't know if everyone kind of just thinks that, but there's so much more to this organization. Can you go over some of the multifunctional things that CHP does? Yeah,
back in 1995, the Highway Patrol absorbed the California State Police. The state police became Highway Patrol officers, and that really expounded our base of what we did. So we now have, we saw for the first time on the Highway Patrol our unit and our officers doing dignitary protection of the governor and the legislative body, similar to the Secret Service for the president. With that, we now have mounted patrol. We have horse rider CHP officers at the Capitol, and the list goes on and on. And we have our air operations, helicopters and airplanes. We have terrorist threat units that work with Homeland Security and keeping California informed on any potential terrorist threats. And it's really expounded over the last, 10 years or so. So it's not just out, chasing cars down or writing speeding tickets anymore.
And in Calaveras County specifically, you kind of have to work well with the sheriff's office and Angels Camp PD and even fire to some extent. I know with an accident scene, fire is very involved in that. How well do you think San Andreas Area CHP works with these other agencies?
We have a great relationship with all the agencies. I attend meetings with the fire guys for, like as we're coming into summer, I know we're going to have a meeting coming up here for any pre-fire planning that we do for emergency action plans. I have a great relationship with Sheriff Kuntz and with Chief Fordahl out of Angels Camp. We talk all the time, and I talk with their staff and everything else. So we have a great working relationship. And there's really that necessity here because, again, as the county is so big and response times, God bless our volunteer firefighters that are scattered all throughout the county that are usually there fairly quickly and can render aid or take care of something until my officers can get there.
Can you explain how certain situations are handled in terms of who handles what? So like, what does CHP do versus what a sheriff's officer or police officer might do?
Well, the simplest way to explain it is you have the California Vehicle Code and the California Penal Code. Within the city limits, a police department handles everything. Vehicle code violations and penal code violations. Out in the county, it's a little bit different. The CHP handles pretty much vehicle code situations, and the sheriff's department handles the penal code things, the burglaries, rapes, that sort of thing. The Highway Patrol, and we're very active, as is the sheriff's department, with people under the influence of drugs and specifically prescription medication. We're seeing a huge rise in DUIs with prescription medication. So we work hand in hand doing that out in the county.
So there isn't like, okay, this person might be under the influence. I'm going to go ahead and hold this scene until CHP can get here and we'll turn it over to them, sort of a thing? The sheriff's office can go all the way through with that, or? Yeah,
they can. Typically if it's a straight DUI, they will typically call us if my officers are tied up at a fatal accident or something and they can't respond. Then the sheriff's department can clearly handle that, and they have some great trained staff that can handle that as well. If it's just somebody who's not driving a car that's under the influence, then clearly the sheriff's department can do that drug evaluation on that person and deal with that situation.
So I think that determining if someone is under the influence could be a controversial issue to some extent, which is why officers go through specific training in order to be experts. What exactly is that training, and how can you kind of look at someone, and what are the signs of what they're under the influence of?
Well, the Highway Patrol has a couple of programs. One is called A-RIDE and one is DRE. DRE stands for Drug Recognition Evaluator. And that's one of the more advanced courses where the officers are trained a little bit more extensive. Some of the signs and symptoms that the body will go through under drugs versus alcohol is different. So all of our officers are highly trained in DUI, alcohol, and recognize the drugs, but unless they are actually certified by the Highway Patrol and through the state, then they become a DRE and they can do some of those additional tests and become expert testimony in court for court purposes.
So you said that drugs are on the rise, people under the influence of drugs, in this county or statewide?
Statewide.
Okay.
Prescription drugs is what we're seeing. A lot of people think, oh, my doctor prescribed it for me. It's okay. And it's not. It can still impair your driving and cause you to be in an accident. So it's still a violation of the law.
So, I mean, do you just, if you're on a prescription, do you just pretty much just not want to drive? Or are there certain ones that might be okay and certain ones that wouldn't be okay? How does a person go about making that decision?
Well, it obviously depends on the drug. I mean, if it's a narcotic drug, that's clearly not okay to drive any type of vehicle or machinery. But pretty much, to me, the golden rule is simple. If the bottle says don't drive a car or heavy machinery when you're on this medication, then don't drive. You know, and the prescription bottles will say that. You know, and of interesting note, if you and I have the same ailment and your doctor gives you a prescription and you give me one of your pills because I have the same thing, that's an additional violation. If I'm carrying your bottle of prescription drugs with your name on it, but I'm taking it, that's another violation.
Is there any difference between how someone is treated if they have a prescription and were under the influence versus if they were just drunk or just had gotten some illegal pills or something like that?
Not really. I mean, they'll go through a gamut of like field sobriety tests. Again, with the drugs, it's a little bit more extensive. A couple of other tests that drugs will show some impairment on that alcohol won't. And if they're under the influence, they're driving a car, then the same sections apply. You're driving under the influence.
Prescription or no prescription, no, it doesn't make a difference.
It doesn't matter.
Okay. And I know, just to give some people some examples, within the last couple years, on the passing lane near the airport on Highway 49, we had a woman who I believe did test to be under the influence, and there were some lives lost in that. Another one on Pool Station Road within the last 3 years, Mr. Roberts was driving and head-on, and he also was proved to be under the influence. So people lose their lives over this, both of those being prescriptions.
Absolutely, yeah. It's you know, a narcotic drug is probably even more serious and impairs people worse than alcohol does, depending on the level of intoxication with alcohol. It can really affect people's perception. It can affect their reaction time and make them sleepy and groggy. They can drift off and drift across that line and hit somebody else. So it's very dangerous.
As a area commander, you must be following what's going on in some other states, like Washington and Colorado. Marijuana has been legalized. Now that's got to be a challenge for the people patrolling the roads there. How would you deal with something like that if you run into someone who has been smoking or eating marijuana?
Well, again, marijuana is still, in California, is still one of those scheduled drugs that is illegal to be under the influence of or be in possession of. Obviously, in my 27 years, things have changed drastically. Mm-hmm. You know, I can tell you when I first started, just a marijuana roach in an ashtray was a felony. And now anything under an ounce, you know, is pretty much a ticket, and they go on their way. So, and as we see in Colorado and the state of Washington, things are changing. So, you know, it's still a violation here. And one of the big issues is dealing with what states look at is the difference between what the state can enact as law versus what the federal law is. Mm-hmm. And clearly the federal law is still, marijuana is not a legal drug, so.
Is it hard to recognize someone's signs if they've been on marijuana, or is that fairly easy in terms of if you pull someone over? Like, are people often under the influence of marijuana and that's a DUI?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so that does qualify.
Yeah, Section 23152A of the Vehicle Code basically says it's illegal to drive under the influence of alcohol and or drugs or a combination of both. So we all know that the legal limit for alcohol in California is 0.08%. If I stop you and you're under the influence of marijuana, you could still be charged with 23152A because you're under the influence of drugs. The B subsection is what designates the state's prima facie limit at 0.08. So if you're a 0.08 percent blood alcohol concentration or higher, you'd be charged with 23152A and B. If you're under the influence of drugs, you could just be charged with 23152A.
So if you have any marijuana in your system, no matter how small, that could still be driving under the influence of drugs?
Well, it could be. Again, our DREs would come in and do their evaluations, including pulse, blood pressure, look at the pupils, have them do some balance and coordination tests.
So it really depends on how well you perform on those?
It depends on that, yes.
How would you feel if California eventually legalized it? What would that do in terms of, would it present challenges or would it make it easier because you wouldn't have to worry about all this?
You know, that's really a tough question. Years ago, I went through our DRE program. I haven't done anything for a while, so unless you keep up with it, you kind of get decertified. But you never lose that knowledge, and it's people tend to think that marijuana is not as bad as alcohol. It doesn't impair them as much. But I know from my training and from what I've seen when I was out working the road as a DRE is that marijuana really does affect people's ability to drive a car. There's a lot of time and space differentium where, for example, they could be on the freeway, speed limit 65, and they're doing 25, but think they're doing 65. Or they could be doing 65 in a 35 and think they're doing 35. So it just depends on the person, and it impairs their ability, To me, the biggest thing is, do they perceive that signal light changing? A stop sign that's there, they think it's 20 or 30 feet farther ahead of where it really is. Now they're in the middle of an intersection causing a crash. So it's, when these states legalize it, I would be interested to see from Colorado and the state of Washington if their accident picture goes up.
So in a way, maybe it's nice that California wasn't first for once on something.
Yeah.
Because you can look at some data from another state.
Sure, yeah.
It's not just drugs and alcohol that kind of impair people. In fact, it seems like the most common thing that's impairing people these days is these electronic devices that everyone seems to have. And I know that has brought up the rate of accidents pretty significantly. Can you just kind of go over this issue and how we're using these devices and how we should and shouldn't be using them?
Well, the law is very clear that you have to use your cell phone hands-free. In other words, with Bluetooth or I know a couple of my relatives have little speakers that they clip on the visor of the car that you buy from Radio Shack for, I don't know, $40, $50. And it's a hands-free system. That's what the law says. You can't even really be holding your cell phone in your hand. I mean, if you're holding your cell phone in your hand looking at the screen and an officer drives by and sees that, it's a violation of the law. And one of the points I really want to make is, and I think there's a misconception out there, is that any teen driver who is under the age of 18 absolutely cannot use any electronic device whatsoever, even with Bluetooth. So they can't text, they can't make a call, they can't use the device at all under the age of 18, being a licensed driver in California. What we recommend is if you need to use your cell phone, you pull off the road, hopefully a safe place like a parking lot or something, make that call, send the text. Hopefully everybody has seen some of the commercials that have been out on the devastation of texting and driving, where they actually have these kids say, here's the last text I sent my sister before she was killed or whatever. And it's really caused our accident picture to go up. And I forget the numbers, but just hundreds and hundreds of tickets throughout California that the Highway Patrol wrote last year to people that are still using their electronic devices. And the law has been around since 2007, 2008, somewhere around in there. So we're trying to get the message out. I know it was very similar to when the new seatbelt law came into effect back 25 years ago or whatever it was. Nowadays, you just don't see a lot of people not wearing their seatbelt. So we're trying to get that message out, tell people to just put that electronic device down. God forbid that they're in a crash and they kill somebody else or they kill somebody in their car. It's very devastating.
A lot of people, I think, convince themselves, I can do just fine, and I can send my texts, and I can make my call, and I can do my GPS and all that kind of thing. And I feel like I'm guilty of this as well sometimes. There's this strong compulsion to just do it, and it's almost like a challenge. Like, it almost makes driving, more interesting in a way. But I mean, these are lives on the line here.
Right.
And so that slight convenience of, seeing what your friend's up to or checking in with your wife or significant other, could be the end of your life or someone else's. But there's a challenge there because we have this belief that, we can do it. Do you run into that a lot where even though you lay your message out clearly, people just don't seem to get it?
Yeah. People have these devices, they get very used to them, and I know my two teenage boys, they can type a heck of a lot faster on that text messaging than I can. And this younger generation, especially, that's what they grew up with. They're used to it, they feel comfortable with it. But at the same time, it is distracting. And I guess one of the simplest ways to put it is the distracting laws that are here kind of really focused on the electronic devices, but it really applies to everything. If you're fiddling with your radio in your car and you're weaving across the lane, you're a distracted driver. If you're, and I know this sounds crazy because we all do it, and that's eating in your car. You hit the McDonald's drive-thru, you're eating that hamburger driving down the road. That's not a problem if you're driving straight and you're focused on the road. The problem is if you drop your burger on your lap and you're weaving across the lane, that can technically be part of the distracted driving thing. Years ago, before these laws were in place, and I've done it, I've stopped females for putting makeup on in their car. And back in the day, before we had the distracted driving laws, it was unsafe speed for conditions. To me, the safe speed while putting makeup on in your rearview mirror is 0. But yet they're driving 35 or 40, and their eyes are not focused on the road, and that's where we have the problems with the accidents.
So just to look at the example you gave, the distracted driving law, there are certain things that are okay to do as long as you're driving safely, right? So if you're adjusting the radio but you're staying straight and you're not weaving, then that's legal. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, every car is equipped with a radio. We're not telling people they can't adjust the volume on their radio or change the channel. But you have to become familiar with any piece of machinery that you operate, a car, a boat, whatever it is, and be able to know that my volume control is right there and I can reach down and grab that without having to be distracted and look away from the road.
But by that logic, if I was able to send a text message and still drive straight, why isn't that okay? Well, how is that different than being distracted by the radio or any other thing?
Well, because in text messaging, you're looking down all the time trying to do that text. You're looking where the keys are, you're trying to type, you're looking to see if it was spelled right, looking for the send button, whatever it is. And the statistics show that people using cell phones cause accidents.
And that's been shown statistically. I mean, how much, is there any kind of like a percentage jump since cell phones became pretty prevalent?
I don't know exactly what those numbers are, but I do know that when cell phones and the distracted driving laws started becoming an issue, on our accident reports that we have, they actually changed those reports and put a box on there if the driver was using their cell phone, either just prior to or at the time of the collision.
How can you determine that? Can you look at their cell phone and check their call history and
Sure.
check? Okay,
Yeah.
and that's okay. So, and that's been a common cause then, seeing, that text message went out or was being typed. Have you ever seen like half-typed text messages with someone who?
Oh yeah, and not to give away all of our secrets here, but it's funny when you pull up next to somebody and you see them go like this, and all of a sudden their cell phone's down, on the floor because they see you as an officer and they know it's wrong. And again, our message is just, when you and I started driving, we didn't have cell phones. Mm-hmm. We survived, right? We didn't have to call our mom, or if we did, we found a payphone. And I know we don't have payphones around anymore, but there's other ways to communicate with people other than when you're driving a car.
And just so people know, even holding this thing, if the officer sees you doing that, that could be a ticket, right? You don't have to be doing anything. Just being seen holding this phone.
Yeah, I mean, the law is hands-free.
Hands-free.
That's the important thing.
Just don't even pick it up.
Clearly, if you're holding it in your hand and there's been no text messages or no calls in the last 10, 15, 20 minutes, you're just holding it, there would be, the officer's discretion to look into that and say, okay, they were just holding it. Ideally, the officer wouldn't even stop them if they were driving straight, but they have a right to stop and check to see if that phone was in use at the time that they saw them holding the phone.
And if someone was texting, gets pulled over, and then, let's say, deletes their text message so there's no record of it, would the officer look at that, not see anything, and then they might be okay, or is it just a discretionary thing?
Well, on a traffic stop, that would be a discretionary thing. If we have a serious accident or a fatality accident, we can actually pull the records from the cell phone providers, under subpoena. So we can see whether the phone was destroyed. We've seen that the phone's completely destroyed in an accident. But we can actually issue a subpoena to AT&T or Verizon or whoever their provider is and pull those records and see, 30 seconds before the crash, they were texting.
Okay. So it's not worth it is what it comes down to.
It is not worth it.
If people want to find out more, they could visit CHP, Google CHP. I'm sure that there's some information there, or they could probably call the local office if they had any questions about this.
Yeah, either way, you can call the local office and anybody there. My special duty officers, my front desk officer can answer those questions. CHP does have a website. There's a lot of Q&A, question and answer type topics on there, and I know there's a lot of distracted driving issues on there.
I wish we had more time, but in the last 2 minutes that we have, I just want to name a couple programs of people, if it catches their ear. You guys are doing so much education. You're doing Start Smart program for teams. We're doing the sober graduation. You're doing car seat and booster seat education, elder driving, making sure that the elders are safe on the road. During the holidays, you're raising money, stuffing patrol cars full of food. CHP is out there doing good things in this community, no doubt about it. So if anyone's interested in any of those things, the number is 754-3541, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, and they probably won't get you because you're busy, but you'll get your staff.
Yeah, and they can answer any questions, and part of that is we value the communities that we work and live in. So we like to be active in them as well. We're part of this community just like everybody else is. So we like to be engaged and deal with our local charitable organizations and educate the people of Calaveras County on the laws and child seats and smart teen driving and all of those things.
Dewayne, I really appreciate you taking the time to come in. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining me on this edition of Inside View. I'm your host, Joel Metzger, and I hope you join me next time.